Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Ann Ziola and I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Engagement at Doane University. And our goals in the Alumni Office are always to educate, engage, and empower alumni. And we are excited to have you join us for this webinar in our brand new professional and personal development program called Lifelong Tigers. This webinar will be recorded and shared on our webpage, and we are also live today on Facebook. So hello to everybody that is joining us. We are glad to have you here today. Today we are presenting Recognizing Your Authentic Self, Strengths, Purpose, and Engagement, presented by Allyson Horne from the class of 1997. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you are joining us through Zoom and you have any issues with connectivity, problems hearing, be sure to leave us a message in our chat box. Our Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement, Mike Stellick, will be there to help you with those items. And you can also chat with each other, and I know Allyson has some great discussion questions for you to answer in the chat box. If you have any questions for Allyson during the presentation, please be sure and type them into the question and answer box, and that's in the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. Questions from Facebook can also be written in the comment section, and Mike will be able to share those with us. And we'll have time during the middle and end of the presentation to answer your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Allyson Horne. Allyson manages training and support for Teammates Mentoring Program and has worked in the field of mentoring for over 15 years. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from Doane in 1997 and earned her certificate in strength-based education from the Clifton Division of Gallup University in 2010. Allyson coordinates program-wide training for teammates mentoring, serves as a coaching guide for the WYLD leadership, co-hosts the Jen and Millie podcast, and channels creativity through a personal blog. So Allyson, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Anne. I was loving the pre-music, Mike. So I feel like we could just all hang out with the pre-music. It was perfectly orchestrated, and music is a big part of my life. So it was putting me in the right frame of mind to get started today. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you and get started, and I'll share with you a little bit about me as we get going here today. I'm Allyson Horne. I'm really excited to be here today. This is such a fun topic for me, but also just to see so many names that I recognize. I feel like I'm part of a Doane reunion, which is fantastic. I also have been really grateful to know that recognizing my authentic self, a lot of that beginning happened for me at Doane. And so for those of you who don't know me, I graduated in 1997. I think I changed my major about 7 times and was lucky enough to graduate in 4 years. Also during that time, I had my daughter, Lauren, who's now 24, and we like to joke that she went to college before she went to kindergarten, because I was very fortunate to be supported throughout my my journey in my 4 years completing my degree, to have so much support, not just as a student, but as a young parent. So when I think about that, and I think about strengths, purpose, and engagement, so much of what I talk about when I train and teach relates back to Doane, and I share a lot about my Doane experience. So I'm very grateful to be here with you today. I'm very grateful that Anne and Mike are orchestrating the technology behind the scenes for me, because technology is not something I'm good at yet. We'll make some growth mindset conversation later on, but something that I'm continuing to work on. So I want to share a little bit about my role with Teammates. I've been with the organization as a mentor for 20 years, but I've been a trainer for 15 years, and I also coordinate our match support and our strengths component to Teammates. So Teammates is not just a school-based mentoring program. If you haven't heard of Teammates, I'm going to have a lot of links throughout the training today, throughout our session today, and Anne and Mike are going to help me lift those up. But Teammates is a school-based mentoring program that was started in 1991 by Coach Tom Osborne and his wife, Nancy. And we're a school-based mentoring program, but we're also a strength-based mentoring program. So it is our role as a mentor to focus on the good. And I'm very fortunate to have had so many mentors who have done that for me and have really encouraged me to be my best and my most authentic self. I'm also a guide for WILD. WILD is a leadership organization that was founded by my strengths coach, Kristen. I do a lot of coaching and leading retreats and dialogue around helping people understand their best self. And so those are the two roles that I have in my life right now, in addition to being a mom of adultish kids. I like to think I'm an awesome auntie, and to be a coworker and a teammate and a friend. So very grateful to be joining you today. A little bit of introduction in today's dialogue. I am a trainer by trade, so this is not my ideal landscape in being able to talk with you. I prefer being in person, but we're going to do this today in a meaningful way. And one of the things that I've loved is I've learned this is okay. We can do great training and great teaching and great learning and great connecting because of technology. And so just a little bit of introduction on today's dialogue. First, we're going to talk about strengths. And we're going to talk about an awareness of your natural talent, which is going to be really important for all of us to consider. Second, we're going to talk a little bit about growth mindset, the concept of growth mindset and the research of Dr. Carol Dweck. Third, we'll talk a little bit about the concept of purpose. And throughout our time today, we're going to discuss how all of these lead to higher levels of engagement and well-being. A bit of pre-learning. I will ask you questions. My number one strength is input. I'll get into that in a minute, but I will ask you questions, and my hope is that you will answer them. If you'd like, you can use the chat. Some of these questions are personal, so if you'd like to keep them to yourself, you can use a notebook. I would love if you'd share them with me later. I'll close today with my contact information. But most importantly, what I've learned from Don Clifton, who is the co-founder of Gallup, is that we don't start learning until we utilize our own voice. So for whatever way we can do that. I prefer to be with you in person, but there are ways that we can hear and share our voices today. And this webinar format's a little bit different for that, but regardless, I'm going to ask you to use your voice. So I will ask you questions. Another bit of pre-learning, I do try to be funny. The best advice I've ever received came from my two children who, as teenagers, begged of me, Mom, please, please try not to be funny. Don't try to be funny. But because we're in person, I'll wonder if you're laughing. And so feel free to type ha 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 in the chat or use an emoji. If you connect with my humor, I will appreciate that. I'm also a storyteller. So for those of you on this webinar who have heard these stories before, I'm sorry, but they just never get old to me. And final pre-learning, we're going to cover a bunch of information in a super short amount of time. So forgive me if I speed through anything. Jot down questions, jot down thoughts along the way, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. So let's dive in. First, let's talk about strengths. I'm going to have Anne and Mike bring up the Strengths Center website. I'm going to talk specifically today about Gallup strengths. And if you know your top 5 Gallup strengths, I would encourage you to list those in the chat. These words, if you are familiar with Gallup strengths, may sound very familiar to you. If you're not familiar with Gallup strengths yet, we're going to learn about these words today. So I'm going to start first with my top 5. And when I think about how I share this, this is one tool. Gallup Strengths is one tool to help identify your best self. For me, as a sociology major, I had taken lots of instruments like this, and there are a couple reasons why I really prefer this, in particular when we're talking about engagement and we're talking about authenticity. So these are my top 5: input, communication, strategic, woo, and empathy. And when I first saw my strengths report, I was kind of in awe because it felt like someone had been following me around my whole life, taking notes as to the quirky ways that I did things. For example, input, my number one strength. That means I'm passionately curious. It also means I love to collect information. And as a kid, for Christmas, I asked for a filing cabinet once. Now, that may seem interesting to some of you, but to input, that seems very natural to me. So when I first saw these words that described me, it was really eye-opening as to how an instrument like this would really dial down as to my best self. But the most unique part of it is that it was really positive language. These words described the best of me, indicators of my best talent, my superpowers, essentially. Now, I knew these about me, but I didn't have positive language necessarily to identify how they were me in a good way. So when I think about input, most of my life I've heard that I ask too many questions. When I think about communication, most of my life I'd heard that I talk too much. Strategic, I've heard often that I overthink things, and woo, that I like to be friends with everybody, and empathy, that my heart bleeds. So I already had an indication of these being my most significant strengths, but finally I had language to describe them in such a positive light. So I now know that input means I'm passionately curious. Communication means I'm a gifted storyteller. Strategic means that I love to think about different pathways. Woo means that I'm super social and I love to connect with other people. And empathy means that my heart senses and my body even senses the energy of a room and the energy of other people. So I've learned so much about me through this language, but also it gave me the opportunity to think about how these help me to be my most productive and my most successful. And most significantly, these were life-changing for me as a parent. If my children would happen to be on this webinar or listening in, they would tell you that this was a really significant change in the way that I chose to parent them, because I had a realization that they are not exactly like me. They don't think like me. They don't see the world through the same lens that I do. So in my family, this really changed and was eye-opening and life-changing for me. In my families, I realized that my sisters are very different from me. In my workplace, I understood that my coworkers come with different approaches, and it's showing up as their most natural self. It helped me better understand. The research around Gallup Strengths shows that the likelihood of any of us having the same top 5 in order is 1 in 33 million. This is a very unique assessment, but it also reminded me 1 in 33 million unique, as in the ways that our coworkers and our family and our kids and our friends and our classmates are coming into conversation, coming into learning, coming into experiences with such a different lens. Over 23 million people have taken the survey and now know their strengths. Many organizations, companies, school districts, and post-secondary institutions are now utilizing Gallup Strengths Awareness as a powerful tool for engagement, success, and overall team building. What I love about this research, to me, is that this really started in Don Clifton's research around successful people. I would really encourage you to check out a lot of the information that I'll be sharing today, in particular regarding Gallup's instrument, regarding the research that they have around hope and engagement. I would encourage you to check out those resources that I'll list today. But one of the things that I want to lift up right away is the Clifton Strengths Center. So I think they put that in the chat, but I want to make sure that you all have access to that. We're going to talk a little bit about how we define strengths. So what Don Clifton's research showed is that most successful people shared a common trait. They understood their talents and they maximized on them in order to achieve their full potential. So to put it in other words, they weren't weakness fixing. They weren't worrying about what they didn't do well. They were optimizing what their strengths and talents were in order to be their best self. A personal example of this, my last name, Horne, is synonymous with athlete in Exeter, the hometown where I grew up in. And I was not an athlete. I think I'm actually one of the only Horne kids to graduate from Exeter and not be an athlete. And one of the things that Gallup Strengths Learning really helped me to understand is that because I had the right mentors and the right teachers and the right people in my life to help me know my strengths, I was able to understand that focusing on my talents was going to help me to be my best self. So I could try to practice 3-pointers in the driveway and maybe not get better at that. But if I used my input, communication, strategic woo, and empathy as a person in speech, in drama, as a cheerleader, I was able to really maximize on my best self. And I think about that all the time. The teachers, not only growing up in Exeter, but the teachers and professors that I had at Doane, who saw my best self and helped me invest in that so that I could achieve my full potential. When I think about the role that I had as a Doane ambassador, this was definitely an opportunity for me to use my woo and my communication. When I think about being Dr. Lori Scheibele's research assistant as a professor's assistant, she helped me really dial down with my strategic and my input. So all of these people in our life, if we have strength spotters, they help us to practice and create pathways for me to where I am today. I want to share with you a quote from Don Clifton. There's no more effective way to empower people than to see each person in terms of his or her strengths. So if you come away with nothing today, just know the power of when you really think about your best self, you're more likely to understand and recognize other people for their best self. The strengths instrument itself is people-focused, and what I really appreciate about that is that it was based on Don Clifton's research and his interviews with people first. So it wasn't coming up with these 34 themes and categories and then trying to stick people into those roles. It was based on his research, asking people, what helps you to be successful? And he understood very early that it wasn't a specific strength or characteristic, but that most successful people knew their talents and they maximized on those in order to achieve their full potential. And this is why the focus on strengths matters. So I'm going to keep coming back to this slide and keep kind of reminding you about the power of engagement. There are a couple areas of Gallup's engagement research that I really want to share with you. One in particular is Gallup's student poll. I refer to it as GSP. It's done nationally, annually, measuring hope, well-being, and engagement in students across the nation. Mike and Ann will share with you where to find more information about GSP. Organizationally, in my role, teammates did Gallup student poll in 2011, and what we found is that if a student is looking forward to seeing their mentor, they have a higher measurement of hope. And I really try to dial that down when I talk to new mentors. Let's think about that. If a student is simply looking forward to seeing you, you can improve upon their measurement of hope, their level of engagement, and their overall quality of life, their well-being. I've got another link for Ann and Mike to lift up around that research that we did back in 2011. But I want to give this experience when I train new mentors for teammates. This slide is one of the most important that I share from Gallup and from their research, because it really reminds us of the simplicity of what happens in the mentoring role and what happens when we show up for someone and we focus on what is right about them. We simply show up and focus on what is good and right about someone. It has these amazing ripple effects. Hope, engagement, well-being, and success all go up. And I think that for me, I recognize and realize that high hope kids, high hope people do amazing things, both in and out of the classroom. And so if we really want to make a difference in someone's life, my friend Dr. Shane Lopez said, we have to help them be excited about the future, and we have to help them focus on their strengths. In my life personally, I can think of all these different ways that this happened for me. That I had all of these people in my life who focused on strengths and were strength-based mentors. So thinking back to some of my favorite classes and my most successful academic seasons, the teachers and professors and mentors who named my strengths and they helped me to build upon them led to me being more engaged during their class, led to me having a higher academic success during their class, but I had no idea that they were improving on my sense of hope and my overall well-being. Mrs. Weber, who is my third grade teacher in Exeter, is an example that I often use when I'm training new mentors, because Mrs. Weber saw my social communication gifts and talents as something that could be lifted up and highlighted in the classroom. It wasn't a problem. It was something that she saw as good and right about me. She encouraged me to write. She encouraged me to give book reports. She encouraged me in all these different ways to let those strengths shine. I think about Dr. Lori Shibley as an example. Dr. Shibley really helped me to think about the ways that I see the world, the way that I could use my talents, the way that I could make the world a better place. And Doc Dudley is another great example that I know a lot of you here will probably be able to relate to. Doc saw me for my strengths and talents, even in the moments when I wasn't necessarily demonstrating them. He saw me for what was right about me, and he encouraged me. In particular, the education department, during a very difficult time for me, encouraged me to stay in school, saw my strengths and talents, encouraged me to pursue those. And I will never forget that. I will never not talk about how grateful I am for that. Lauren Davidson, who is my first boss, who was the operator owner of Davidson Insurance in Crete. He was my first boss in my internship. He saw me for my strengths and talents. He was someone who invested in me, saw the best in me. I think of all of these examples, and I have tremendous gratitude for the individuals who saw me at my best, even at those times where I may have been showing my not so best. They saw me for my strengths, my worth, my value, and my potential. And I believe that that has led me to the work that I do today, where I am able to be part of a mission where we do this for other students and we do this for other people. I'm proud to be part of that, helping more students have at least one more positive adult in their life, one more positive influence who notices their sparks and their strengths and supports them unconditionally, because that builds ripple effects of hope. And we'll get more to hope. We'll get to hope here more in a little bit. One of the questions I want to ask you, and I hope that Ann and Mike will lift this up in the chat, who is your Mrs. Weber? Who's your Doc Dudley, Lori Shibley? Who's your Lauren Davidson? Who are those people? And have you told them? Could you reach out to them? And I want you to really think about today, who are you, a Mrs. Weber too, and realize the impact that you have. So the instrument itself, Strengths, I won't get too far into this, but I do want to lift up some research around it. StrengthsFinder is an instrument. Again, I've taken many other surveys that help me better understand myself, but I think that Strengths is unique in a few ways. It's a very finite instrument. Again, likelihood of you having the same top 5 in order, 1 in 33 million. 23 million people globally have taken it. But I appreciate tremendously that this instrument was built on people. And I love that this has this positive language that helps me see the words as indicators of my best self. And it also provides this common language for me to build on conversations with others. The more you understand your own strengths, the more likely you will be to honor and recognize strengths in other people. So a great question to ponder today of all days is, how do we use strengths or use strength spotting to create a culture of invitation, of belonging, of inclusion, truly opening ourselves up to understanding other perspectives that surround us, starting with a positive outlook. So I want to talk a little bit more about how we help other people to think about creative ways to use their unique talents, and think about ways that we help ask this question of ourselves: what makes me successful, and who are my complementary partners? So when I think about this for me in my own life, I've been very fortunate to have lots of complementary partners. One of the things I'll ask you today is to think about your younger self, maybe your 4th grade self. And did you know your strengths then and know them as superpowers? Sometimes shortly after 4th grade, it feels like I started looking around comparing myself to other people, but 4th grade me knew myself with input, communication, strategic woo, and empathy. I think after 4th grade or somewhere after 4th grade, I started thinking about and wishing for other strengths, or wishing to be different, or wishing to be more like someone else. It's been a long, winding road to get back to my 4th grade self and my most authentic self. And I believe that it's still a practice for me, and maybe for some of you. Strengths language has not only given me the opportunity to apply my most successful self, but to recognize and lift up strengths in others. So when you're considering complementary partnerships, it helps for us to surround ourselves with people who have different strengths, different talents, different experiences, different mindsets, people who think differently, because it helps us to better understand a broader picture. And I'm going to ask you today to really consider you as the CEO of you. Who is part of your personal board of directors? Who lifts you up? Who helps you to be your best self? Who are your complementary partners? And if you can, really jot down and think about who are some of those people who are part of your personal board of directors. And we're going to practice this right away. So what I'd like to do is have you think about and share something that's happened recently that you're proud of. When did it happen? And what strengths or talents do you feel like contributed? So this is a great practice for us to dial down into strengths. Doesn't matter if you've taken the Gallup StrengthsFinder survey. Doesn't matter if you know anything about strengths language. You know yourself, you know your talents. Think about a proud of moment and what strengths may have contributed. There's a little caveat here that I want to make sure that I add. It needs to be a proud of moment of yours. So not necessarily a proud of moment that you have for a coworker or a friend or your spouse or your dog or your kids or your grandkids. Something you have done recently that you're proud of. And if you're willing to, I would love for you to share in the chat, what's a proud of moment that's happened recently and what strengths contributed. I'm going to pause here for a second to see if we have anyone who would be willing to do that. Fantastic. These are brave. So I love that there are responses right away, because often when I do this activity with school staff, this is one of the ways that I present about what teammates is all about. And when I ask a group of school staff members to share what's something, I usually have them in a big group, and I will ask them to find someone they don't typically interact with and share what's something that you've done recently that you're proud of and what strengths contributed. And after the initial stares and kind of what is going on here look, once they get together and start sharing, the energy goes like this and the volume goes like this, and bringing them back together is sometimes the greatest challenge. But it's sometimes what I hear is, this is hard. It's hard to share about something that we've done recently that we're proud of. It's not easy to come up with something that I've done or strengths that I've used. And I think that part of the reason that it's difficult for us as adults is we see this as bragging. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you today is, when did celebrating your best self get labeled as bragging? Where can we recognize and see our strengths in action so that we can further apply them as tools for our best self? Because the more we do this, and the more we practice this, the more likely we'll be able to do this for others. So that's a little bit about strengths. When we think about, again, I'm going to go back to this previous activity, just even talking about your strengths and talking about your proud of moment, it gives us an opportunity to witness this kind of engagement and ideally a higher sense of hope and well-being after today's session. That's my hope for today, is that all of you leave with a better recognition of your best self, your authentic self, but that you're also more hopeful and you're more engaged and you're more excited about the future. More of these moments lead to success. So a question like that would be a great conversation starter with your family, in the workplace, on an elevator. If you're seated next to me on a plane, I am probably not going to talk to you about the weather, but I may ask you a question like this, or I may ask you if you love what you do, or I may ask you about what your strengths are if you know them. When my kids were little and they would come home from school, I started something they call the mom interrogation, but they've come to know and love as our family dinner conversation. And I would ask them to share the best part of their day, the silliest part of their day. And it was a great way for us to focus on the good and focus on conversation. When my daughter got into middle school, a lot of times it was more challenging for us to focus on the good and do a best and a silliest. There was a lot of middle school drama during that time. And I always gave us kind of a framework and a starting point to say, let's first focus on the good and let's talk about best and silliest. That later turned into, let's share how we used a strengths today and one thing that we're grateful for. Lauren is 24 and Sean is 20. And when I'm lucky enough to sit across the dinner table with them now, we still do that. We still share the best, the silliest, the strength that you use today and one thing that you're grateful for. Those are the kinds of conversations that keep us engaged. And we can have those conversations with anyone. We can have those conversations in the workplace. We can have those conversations at the grocery store. More of these kinds of moments that lead to engagement will also lead to success. Gallup's research shows that focusing on strengths leads to higher engagement and higher levels of hope. And we all know stories of hope, but hope is measurable. It's one of the highest indicators of success. I've learned a lot, and most of what I've learned about hope came from my friend, researcher, Dr. Shane Lopez. He wrote a wonderful book called Making Hope Happen. Shane did a lot of work in Gallup arena, but also at the University of Kansas. And what Shane helped me understand is that hope is the idea and energy about the future. And so when we are future casting or nexting, thinking about what we're looking forward to next, that creates a higher sense of hope, higher sense of engagement, and overall higher quality of life. I've asked Anne and Mike to share the link for Shane's book. I shared the link from my local bookstore, which is Bookworm here in Omaha, but feel free to check it out at your local bookstore as well, Making Hope Happen by Dr. Shane Lopez. And when you think about hope, I want you to ponder what story of hope comes to mind when you think about this research. I hope people do amazing things. So that was a little bit about strengths, and now we're going to shift into growth mindset. Practicing growth mindset does not come easy for me. It helps me to reframe my thoughts and accept challenges as learning opportunities and being open to trying new things and making yet statements. We'll get to all of those. Growth mindset learning, I was really so fascinated by the research and teaching of Dr. Carol Dweck. If you haven't had the chance to read her book, or at minimum watch her TED Talk, and I have Ann and Mike ready to share the link for Dr. Carol Dweck's TED Talk, I highly recommend it. Growth Mindset is one of our most common requested mentor academies that we have within teammates, and I believe that it's most requested because we're all practicing this. It's helped me understand that there's no age limit on learning, thankfully, and there's really no life season end into which growth can happen, and Growth Mindset helps us apply for success. So I want to give a personal example of this. I applied at Gallup in 1997. right before I graduated from Doane. I was so excited. As a sociology major, this was my dream job. And I was devastated when I didn't make it past the phone interview. And I realize now that if I'd gotten that job, I would not be where I am today. And I would not have had the opportunity to work with their top researchers, their best teachers, Dr. Don Clifton's family. Since 2009, I've been lucky enough to be able to apply their research and their learning in my life. Sometimes timing is everything, and sometimes you have to experience life before you figure out how you really want to live it. So that's a growth mindset personal example for me in the ways that I thought about that, what I perceived as a failure turned into an opportunity for growth and an opportunity for learning. This is one of my favorite sticky notes. Maybe you have a sticky note similar to this, but if you are on this webinar today and know me as a friend or a family member, you know this is very, very true for me. I never make the same mistake twice, make it 5, 6, 10 times maybe, just to be sure. This is what I love most about growth mindset, and this is how I practice it. I am a very good student, but I'm a slow learner, so that's why I love teaching, in particular around this concept. I've learned to discover the ease and the understanding of making mistakes and trusting failing, letting myself be carried by something larger than me. I've made plenty of mistakes, lots of them, but I'm here in human form and I'm always learning. And that mistake doesn't define me. It often has led to new ideas, transformation, resilience, and true lessons that couldn't be taught without experience. I believe that all rejection is redirection. And if we choose to utilize growth mindset, it helps us to better practice that. Growth often occurs in that quiet space between what has been and what is yet to come. And the power of the word yet is really important to me. In celebration of my 25th high school reunion a few years back, I wrote a letter to my younger self. It was one of the most powerful reflections that I've had of growth mindset, and I've asked for Anna and Mike to share that here. I think I keep learning, and I continue to keep learning that growth mindset is really something that's reminding us that intelligence is developed like a muscle. Our brains are malleable and we're always learning, and mistakes are just opportunities to learn. Challenges are teaching tools. When we're open to learning new things, we practice growth mindset. So Dr. Carol Dweck's decades of research on growth mindset and on achievement and success, she found that people believe that their most basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work, that brains and talent are just the starting point. But growth mindset is a view of a love of learning and a resilience that is essential for success. Modeling a growth mindset creates motivation and productivity, and it also enhances relationships. There is so much power in making a yet statement. One of mine is, I'm not good at kayaking yet. I love to kayak. It's one of my favorite outdoor activities, but I'm not good at it yet. Also, another one that I make often is, I'm not good at crafts yet. I have mounting evidence that I will never be good at crafts, to be quite honest. Once I burned my foot with a glue gun. I was trying to help a friend create party favors. If you burn your foot with a glue gun, crafts may not be your gig. But the yet statement, I'm not good at crafts yet, or I'm not good at kayaking yet, it helps me shift my perspective, and it helps me see what's possible. And it reminds me that I am a lifelong learner. So I'm going to give you some homework. I would love for you to make your own yet statement. If you'd like to say it out loud in the chat, feel free. If you'd like to send it to a friend, text it to someone who you can count on to keep you accountable. But we want you to share it, because we can be accountability partners for one another. Weeks from now, send me an email and ask me how I'm doing on crafts, or ask me how I'm doing on kayaking. I'll appreciate it. Modeling growth mindset is essential for our families, and it's essential for our schools and our communities. When we show that we're still learning and we're in a place where we can demonstrate the ability to have uncomfortable conversations, that's growth mindset. Reframing mistakes and learning opportunities is as important as ever. And for me, it's a great opportunity for us to align our best selves and create some meaningful impact. So let's talk a little bit about purpose. We're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about purpose. I really appreciate the great research that has come from, there's a couple different websites. Make sure I find them in my notes so that I lift them up exactly in the way that I want to. when you think about the concept of purpose, there's a lot of definitions, and it'll be different for everybody because purpose is really defined by our unique values, our unique experiences, our unique strengths. But I've depended heavily on the work of William Damon and Kendall Bronk, which I'll refer to here and there. But Dr. Damon's definition of purpose is a long-term, far-horizon goal that is personally meaningful and inspired by a desire to make a difference in the broader world. So I want to focus a little bit about that today. When we think about purpose and we think about the opportunities to practice engagement, think about someone who loves their job, someone who just seems to be in alignment with this, with their purpose. Think about someone who loves what they do and looks forward to each day. They don't see Mondays like Mondays, they see Mondays like one more day. Mondays and Fridays are the same. Someone who loves their job. So what I'd love to hear from you are some words and phrases that sound like engagement. What does it look like? What words come to mind? What phrases? As an individual or in the workplace. So if you have ideas on what does engagement look like? What does it look like when someone loves their job or is in their purpose? What does that look like? And I'll encourage you to share here. For me personally, I think about my classes at Doane where I was truly engaged. I think about in the workplace and the organizations that I have worked in. I think about at Davidson Insurance back in 1994, 95 when I started there. I think about those moments when I was in my strengths. So Gallup has lots of research, and the second piece of research that I want to bring to light today is around Gallup's research on employee engagement. Last year's findings showed, and this is referred to as the Q12 measurement. Some of you may be very familiar with it. But last year's Gallup's research showed that 1/3 of Americans were engaged at their job. I'm going to say that again. 1/3 of Americans were engaged at their job. And 2/3 were not. And Gallup actually divides that into two buckets, disengaged and actively disengaged. And I won't get too far into that research today, but I do want to lift up the 1/3. The 1/3 that are engaged at their job. Gallup did a great job focusing on what does that look like in an engaged employee. And they found that 1/3 of engaged employees had a higher level of hope, had a higher sense of well-being, and had an overall higher quality of life. Basically, engaged employees aren't just more productive, they live better lives. So when I think about, I have fantastic coworkers. One that comes to mind in particular is my coworker, Tess. Tess and I have worked together over the last few years, and we do a lot of collaboration when it comes to putting together strengths mentoring and strengths mentoring resources for our organization. Tess is a gifted strength spotter, so she is really good at recognizing and helping me see where I'm using my strengths on a daily basis. So when I pull up into our office here in Omaha and I see Tess's car in the parking lot, I am already looking forward to going to work, simply because I know that there's at least one person in the workplace who's going to see me for my best self today. When I see Tess's name in my email inbox, I'm already looking forward to reading the email before I even get to it. That's what strengths and engagement looks like in a coworker. Tess is a gifted strength spotter. She's a gifted strengths coach, and she helps me identify and see my strengths in action. And I'm lucky enough to work with her. So even before I get to the office, even before I open that email, I am more engaged because I know I will have a strength-focused experience while working with her. There's a 20-year age gap between Tess and I, and that has led to some great conversations about generational perspective. And it's opened some dialogues and conversation for us to bridge conversations, which has turned into a podcast. Tess and I co-host the Jen and Millie podcast. I'm a Gen Xer and Tess is a millennial. And we have strength-based conversation, but we also have conversations around generational differences. So in the chat or in your notebook or in your mental dialogue that we're having here today, I want you to think about who is your Tess and who depends on you to be the Tess in your workplace. So I want you to ponder a little bit about that if you'd be willing to share it, but I would really for sure encourage you, if you have the opportunity, to let that person know, and let that person know that they help for you to build on your sense of purpose. So let's talk a little bit more about purpose, and let's talk about one of my favorite words, a Japanese term called ikigai. So when you think about the concept of purpose and you think about engagement, we're going to dive a little bit deeper. When I talk to people about purpose and values and strengths, I like to help them create these 3 circles. And if you've got a notepad in front of you, jot these down with me. So just draw 3 circles. 3 circles that look a lot like this. In one circle is what you love, and another circle is what you're good at, your strengths, and the third circle is what your community and world needs. The intersection of those 3 circles is your purpose. The Japanese term for that I prefer is ikigai, which means reason for being. So when you think about what you're good at, what you love, and what your world or community needs, the intersection of those 3 circles, essentially where that triangle is, that's your purpose. This graphic is from the Greater Good and Education Center at Berkeley. Fantastic resources that they have on their website for educators, for parents, particularly in the areas of well-being. And I'll have Ann and Mike offer that link as well. But I think this is such an important dialogue when we think about purpose, what you love to do, what your strengths and talents are, and what the world needs. I teach an academy session on the concept of purpose, and one day at the office when I was working on it, Coach Osborne was there and we were chatting a little bit about what I was working on. And I shared with him about these 3 circles. And I said, you know, Tom, you probably knew from a very young age that you were destined to be a coach. I think about someone in their purpose. I think about someone who, in my mind, I assumed had always known that's what he wanted to do because he seems to be exactly designed for it. And he shared with me that he didn't know that actually until his early 20s. And he was on a trajectory for a different path when this kind of concept of what he loved, what he was good at, and what the community needed or what the team needed at that time presented an opportunity. So when you think about this, it's really important to know that this doesn't happen overnight and not necessarily maybe even happening right now, but it's something that we can practice and something that we can think about. So I'd like for us to give this a go and give this a little bit of a practice together. And I want you to think about your 4th grade self. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and think about your 4th grade self. And once you guys settle into that, I want to know for sure that you can picture that person. Sometimes for me, I have a hard time picturing that person. It's been a while since I've seen her. But I want you to think about your 4th grade self. And now what I'd like you to do, and you can do this in the chat if you would like to. Typically when I'm in person, I give people 3 note cards. First note card, or the first share out, of course, is your name. The second is a title or a role, or titles or roles that you have right now. So I want you to think about a title that you go by. So for me, that would be mom, trainer, wild guide, strengths coach. So those are some of the titles that I have. And so if you're willing, I would love for you to share in the chat. This is kind of a fun activity because it reminds us about our 4th grade self. So your name and a title that you have. And I'll let you guys share here. Again, for me, I'm going to model this, Allyson. A title that I have is mom and trainer and coach. Now the next reflection, and I want you to think about your 4th grade self. What did your 4th grade self think that you would have as a title in your life right now? What did your 4th grade self think would be this kind of dialogue? So for me, I was planning as a 4th grader for a dual career. I was planning to be an attorney and a Dallas Cowboys cheerleader. Dual career, very motivated to not only utilize my strengths, input communication as an attorney, and woo as a cheerleader. So when I think back to this as of what my 4th grade self thought, there's some great ways that this ties in together. My hope as you're sharing and thinking about your 4th grade self is there's some kind of tie to what you're doing today. For me, I am a presenter, I'm a public speaker. So that attorney version of me has turned into more of a teacher and a trainer. And then I think about the Dallas Cowboys cheerleader. I am a cheerleader in a lot of ways, in a lot of different roles that I have in my life. So my 4th grade self knew me Now, it may not have looked exactly like that, and I certainly didn't know in 4th grade, and I didn't know as an 18-year-old headed off to college what my purpose was, or where I was headed next, or what was going to happen, or how I would get there. So I think sometimes it's important for us to reflect on our 4th grade self, or our junior high self, or our high school self, or our early college self, and remember that we may not have known exactly where we'd be today. When you think about growth mindset, there may have been lots of learning opportunities along the way that have helped us to craft our purpose and understand our sense of ikigai, our reason for being. But that typically takes experience and learning before that will happen. So I'll be excited to look at the chat here in a second when we think a little bit about what people have shared. When I do this activity with mentors, the most common 4th grade self is meteorologist. And I don't know if that's a generational thing, that there were a lot of people that were planning on being meteorologists. Maybe one of you who's on here today is a meteorologist. I hope so. Those are very, very important roles. But when I talk to people about this, a lot of people said my 4th grade self said I was going to be a meteorologist. I just think it's such a great reflection. Again, another great conversation starter. So if you're seated next to me on a plane, or you happen to be lucky enough to be stuck with me in an elevator, I'm not going to talk about the weather. I will probably ask you a question like this because it leads to engagement. So when we talk a little bit about purpose and around the concept of purpose and understanding how we identify purpose, it really is narrowed down from the research that I have found from Dr. Kendall Bronk and also from Dr. William Damon. Dials down into the way that we identify purpose and the way that we think about our purpose really helps to consider mentors. So who is in our life that can help us to understand our best self? Who's on your board of directors? Who's in your support circle? How do you surround yourself with people who lift and support you? Expanding vision. So thinking outside your comfort zone, trying something new, being willing to consider other options. Practicing growth mindset. So back to what we talked about earlier in growth mindset, forgiving yourself and others for those learning opportunities because mistakes are an opportunity for us to learn. And then starting with why, identifying your values and identifying what those mean specifically to you. So again, we're going to go back to strengths. When I think about people operating in their strengths and while practicing growth mindset and living in their purpose, people who report having purpose in life are more likely to report greater life satisfaction, higher sense of hope, positive emotions, physical health, longevity, grit, and resilience. I've repeated through this slide and throughout our time together, this slide has been one that I wanted to focus on because I hope that it sticks. When I work with people and I talk to people about their purpose, it really reminds me and it helps me better understand as a coach and as a guide that I have an opportunity to help people think about and think out loud about their reason for being, their why. Thinking about those 3 circles. The door is open when it comes to forming what this looks like. We may not be there yet, but we can certainly continue to practice it. So I've repeated this slide throughout our time together today because I do want it to stick. Today's learning is an opportunity for you to apply these resources to be your greatest asset, which is you, your authentic self, but also to strength spot and to create opportunities for strength-based conversation and the ways that we can create a culture of invitation where we can have the opportunity to focus on what's right about each other. These conversations are going to build trust, they'll build connection, but they'll also build on hope, engagement, and well-being for our families, for our teammates, for our coworkers, and for our communities. So I want to open it up to some questions. We did pretty good with time. Here is my contact information. I do want you all to have it. That's my email address. You can also find my contact information on the Teammates website, teammates.org, and also the Wild Leadership website, which is wildleadership.com. You can find my contact information, a little bit more about me there, but I do want you to have this info. If there's anything that I shared today that you'd like to dive in further, or there are resources I can share, our Teammates Mentor Resource Library is full of great resources. We have a whole toolkit on growth mindset and the concept of purpose. So I want to open it up to some questions and some takeaways.
Thank you, Allison. That was very good. I learned so much and wrote so much down. So thank you for doing that. We'll go ahead now and take some time for questions. So just a reminder, if you're joining us on Zoom, please be sure to type your questions into the Q&A box that's just at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. Or if you're joining us from Facebook Live, use the comment section at the bottom of that Facebook Live video. So we'll go ahead and start to take some questions now. And Allison, while everybody is writing their questions down, I just want to make sure and tell you how thankful we are that you are joining us today. You have been an alum that has really added a lot to our group, especially over the last several years, that you continue to support the university through the Doane Alumni Council by volunteering at events, and you're just such a great example of what a Doane alum can become. So thank you again for joining us virtually and sharing information with our alumni worldwide. And if anybody has any questions for Allison, now is the time to put them in. We did have somebody a little bit earlier mention in the chat, Allison, that sometimes they have trouble organically incorporating their strengths into their chats, their one-on-one chats with people. So for example, if you're in the teammates program and you're playing cards with somebody, how do you organically start to bring up your strengths and their strengths? Oh, and we're gonna unmute you.
There we go.
There we go.
I think that it can start with really simple conversations. One of the things I did want to close with is that I was able to experience this through so much of my Doane experience and continue to, and that's why I stay engaged with Doane, is because I had these professors and mentors and staff who saw me for my strengths. Sometimes it's in the way that we ask a question, you know, just in asking somebody, tell me what was the best part of your day, or tell me about a recent success, or tell me about when time seems to just fly by, when you're in those moments of flow, because those are often indicators to our greatest talent. When you think about some of there are great resources out there, and I know I gave you guys a long list of those to bring to the chat today. I lead with input, so I love to collect resources. But there are so many ways that we can start conversations on a strength-based lens. I think about now, if I'm in the grocery store and I overhear a conversation about someone sharing about their love of history, I'm automatically thinking about the strength of context. Or if I'm hearing my middle sister, Amber, has high harmony. And every time we have a family dialogue, Amber is so gifted at seeing both sides of the story. And I can see that strength in her, and I can name it and say, oh, I'm so grateful that you bring that strength to the table. So there are lots of ways, you know, just in some regular, meaningful conversations and conversation starters, open-ended questions are always the way to go. And also, I'm just now looking at the chat, and you know that I can't look at the chat and present at the same time. I'm just now looking, and I mean, I have tears in my eyes because there are names I have not seen in 20 years that make me so happy, because and this group, it's gifted strength spotting. By the way, a little fun fact, the younger the student, the more gifted strength spotting is. The younger the student, the more gifted they are in spotting and recognizing strengths. So believe it or not, your kiddos see the best in you and can probably name your strengths, sometimes better than we even can. We're finding that a lot with our elementary mentees.
Well, Allison, the chat was going crazy throughout your entire presentation. So we will make sure to make available to everybody that joined us today a list of all of the resources that Allison provided, all the links, so that you can follow up on some of those websites and those different resources that she provided earlier. So thank you again to everybody for joining us. This webinar has been recorded, and so we'll make sure to share it online soon. We'll share those links and resources, and to see a lineup of the new webinars that we have coming up, just make sure to go to doane.edu/lifelongtigers. And our next webinar will take place next Thursday, June 25th at 12 p.m. Central, and it will feature Erica Hayden, who joined us today as a guest. And Erica is from the class of 2007, and she's going to talk about aligning your time with your values. And so that's a webinar that goes hand in hand with a lot of the things that Allyson spoke about today. It's very complimentary. So thank you again for joining us. And as always, go Doane. Bye, everybody.